Welcome to my channel, Geri in Stitches. If you like my content, please subscribe, leave a comment, and ring that notification bell. Today I am showing you how I created this stitched shibori pattern of flowers on a raglan sleeve dress. The shibori dyeing happened after I sewed up the garment, and the tricky thing is that there are a lot of gathers around the neckline and sleeves that would be difficult to stitch the resist pattern on. So I am strategically removing the elastic tape around the bottom of the sleeve first and staying clear of the gathered neckline when plotting where the flowers would go. Drawing a grid on the garment to position the flowers is the first task at hand. To do so, I am using a 2-inch wide clear plastic ruler and an erasable marker. The grid is a 2-inch grid, and I start off by drawing the center front line of the garment. Then from there, draw parallel lines that are 2 inches apart. Then I draw the perpendicular lines that are also 2 inches apart to form the grid. Repeat this process for the back of the dress and the sleeves as well. Always start the lines from the center line parallel to the grain line, then move outwards. When the grid is drawn, we are ready to fold and stitch the resist pattern. Use a sharp embroidery needle. I use a strong nylon thread and double thread the needle for extra strength. Tie a knot at the end. The first fold is made on one of the grain line or vertical folds. At the cross point, which will be the center of the flower, the next fold is made at a 60-degree angle to the first fold. And the third fold is another 60-degree angle fold, but made in the opposite direction to the second one. The last and fourth fold is bringing the point of the fabric down about half an inch to create a fold that resembles an equilateral triangle. Keep the folds together and then insert the needle from back to front close to the tip of the triangle. Next, wrap the threads close to one side of the triangle. Again, insert the needle close to the first entry point from back to front. Pull on the threads to bind tightly, and it should create a dent in the top fold. The tighter the bind, the clearer the resist pattern. Wrap the threads again around the top fold, now with the threads close to the other side of the triangle, and insert the needle from back to front again close to the original entry point. Bind tightly. Then tie a knot to secure the folds and stitches. I made a mistake here by tying the knot only through one of the double threads. I didn't have my glasses on and I didn't realize what I was doing, so don't make the same mistake. Tie the knot through both threads, and for extra security, tie a double knot to make sure the bind holds. The pattern of stitching resembles a V shape. You just saw me fold the first flower, and it probably took about 2 minutes to execute. For the dress, I would go on to fold about 304 more. Yes, there are exactly 305 flowers, and the time-consuming part of this technique is individually folding and stitching each one of them. This clip that I'm showing you here is the exact real-time sewing up of a single flower with no editorial cuts. It's my way of being completely transparent about how long it will take. Going into this, you have to be ready to invest the time and effort required if you're planning on the kind of effect that I created on my dress. My advice is to put on a podcast, an audiobook, or even start a Netflix binge to help pass the time and to break up the monotony of the task at hand. One good thing about this technique is that the folding, stitching, and binding happens all at once, so when this is done, we can go straight into the dyeing process. But to be honest, this part of the process took much longer than I anticipated, and it's a matter of managing expectations. So just know that if 305 flowers need to be stitched up, then it'll take about 610 minutes. And then you can schedule your time appropriately. At this point in time, since it was my first time trying out this technique, I wasn't very sure if it would work out in the end. And in the back of my mind, I had some fears that all this labor would go to waste. But what encouraged me was making and dyeing some small samples in the beginning. So I encourage you to do that as well to make sure that the folding, stitching, and binding works before jumping into a bigger project like this one. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the positioning of the flowers on the grid on a piece of paper. And what you see here is a 2-inch grid that should also be drawn on the fabric. For the first vertical column, the flowers are folded and stitched on the cross points of the grid, just like the way I showed from before. The cross point position of the flowers are the same for the second column that follows after, not the immediate one that comes after. That means that the cross point positions for the flowers are denoted in a pattern by these black circles that I've drawn onto the paper. For the columns that are in between these, the flowers will be positioned in the center between the cross points. And I'm circling these positions in green so that you have a good visual representation of how the flowers are positioned on my dress. This way, of positioning also provides enough space between columns to make it easier to fold the fabric. So the pattern that results is that one column has flowers folded on the cross points, then the next column will have flowers folded with their centers positioned in the midpoint between the cross points. You can see the positioning very clearly in these still pics of the final result. And when I folded and stitched all the flowers, they will look something like this. I always keep the folding pattern for each flower consistent throughout each column, but I switch it up for the adjacent column by folding the fourth 1/2 inch fold facing the other way. Now the dress is ready to be dyed. Use the dyeing product that you prefer and follow the product instructions carefully. I've chosen RIT dye all-purpose dye for natural fibers for this project because my dress is made out of 100% linen. And I always prefer the stove-top method when dyeing with this product, even though it can be done in other ways. And I always use the RIT color stay dye fixative immediately after dyeing to minimize color bleeding and to enhance the vibrance of the dye. You don't see me do it in this video, but it's key for successful dyeing with RIT dyes. We've finally arrived at the part of the dyeing process that I love, which is the unbinding and the reveal. What I do these days is to completely rinse the fabric from excess dye and launder the fabric while it's still bound up before undoing the threads. The best tool to do this job is a seam ripper. I also wear gloves to keep the color from dyeing my fingers. I know that at this point there's some excited impatience to undo all the knots, but it's important to be careful not to poke holes into your fabric while doing this with your seam ripper. So take your time and carefully remove the threads. This is always a breathtaking moment for me. I love how, even though each flower was made in exactly the same way, each flower somehow manages to be completely different from each other. So there is a consistency in pattern and a serendipitous quality between the flowers, yet each one is unique. Notice that the pattern produces 6 petals, and one petal out of the 6 is outlined as the resist instead of completely filled in with the resist. And that is something that also gives these flowers an extra flavor and character. Thanks so much for joining me in this Shibori flower adventure. Please subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, and ring that notification bell. I hope you try out this technique, and if you do, please tag me and show off your work. I would love to celebrate with you your Shibori endeavors. You can also find me on Instagram at Geri in Stitches for more sewing, stitching, and dyeing projects and inspiration. Happy stitching, happy dyeing!